The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the Pentagon's underground command center as Major Sarah Chen walked through the maze of corridors that most Americans would never see. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floors, each step measured and purposeful. At 28, she was one of the youngest officers ever assigned to the National Security Agency's most classified division, a unit so secret that even its existence was known to fewer than 50 people in the entire government. Sarah had earned her position through a combination of brilliant academic performance at West Point, fluency in 4 languages, and an almost supernatural ability to memorize complex information. What set her apart from her peers wasn't just her intelligence, but her unwavering moral compass in a world where gray areas were the norm. Her colleagues respected her, her superiors valued her judgment, and those who worked under her would follow her into any situation without question. The assignment that would change her life forever began on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah received a call at 0500 hours, summoning her to a meeting that would reshape her understanding of national security. The voice on the other end belonged to General Patricia Morrison, a woman who had broken through countless barriers in her rise to become the first female director of nuclear operations. Morrison was known for her steel-gray hair, piercing blue eyes, and a reputation for never backing down from anyone, regardless of rank or position. When Sarah entered Morrison's office, she found herself in the presence of 3 other people she didn't recognize. The room felt heavy with unspoken tension, and she could sense that whatever was about to be discussed would carry implications far beyond anything she had previously encountered. Morrison gestured for her to sit, and without preamble, began explaining why Sarah had been chosen for a mission that would test every principle she held dear. The briefing revealed a disturbing pattern that had emerged over the past 6 months. Intelligence reports suggested that someone within the highest levels of the military was providing classified information to foreign agents. The leak wasn't just any ordinary intelligence breach. It involved nuclear protocols, launch procedures, and most critically, the rotation schedules for the nuclear authentication codes that would be required for any strategic weapons deployment. Sarah listened in, growing alarm as Morrison explained that the investigation had narrowed down to a handful of suspects, all of whom held positions of enormous trust and responsibility. The problem was that conventional investigative methods had proven ineffective. Whoever was responsible had covered their tracks expertly, using methods that suggested either extensive training in counterintelligence or assistance from someone who understood how internal security systems worked. The solution Morrison proposed was both elegant and dangerous. Sarah would be assigned to a new position that would give her access to the same classified information that was being leaked. She would essentially become bait, with the hope that the traitor would either attempt to recruit her or reveal themselves through their actions. The assignment would require her to work closely with several high-ranking officials who were potential suspects, including some of the most powerful figures in the American military establishment. What made the assignment particularly challenging was that Sarah would be completely alone in her mission. She couldn't trust anyone, couldn't confide in colleagues, and couldn't rely on backup if things went wrong. Morrison explained that the security breach was so serious that even the FBI and CIA had been kept in the dark about the investigation. Sarah would report directly to Morrison, and only Morrison, using communication methods that bypassed all normal channels. As the briefing continued, Sarah learned that her new role would involve managing one of the most sensitive aspects of nuclear security. She would be responsible for overseeing the daily authentication procedures that ensured only authorized personnel could access nuclear weapons systems. This meant she would be privy to information that could literally determine the survival of millions of people if it fell into the wrong hands. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden as Morrison handed her a sealed envelope containing her new assignment orders. Inside, she found details of her cover story, her new security clearances, and most importantly, a set of emergency protocols that would allow her to contact Morrison if she discovered the identity of the traitor. The protocols included code words, secure communication methods, and extraction procedures that read like something from a spy novel. Sarah's training for the assignment began immediately. She spent the next 2 weeks learning systems and procedures that existed in the shadows of American defense policy. She memorized nuclear authentication codes, studied the psychological profiles of foreign intelligence operatives, and practiced surveillance techniques that would help her identify suspicious behavior without arousing suspicion herself. The The most difficult aspect of her preparation wasn't the technical training, but the psychological adjustment required for living a double life. Sarah had always prided herself on her honesty and straightforward approach to military service. Now she would need to become someone who could smile at colleagues while secretly evaluating their potential for treason, someone who could participate in classified briefings while mentally cataloging every detail for later analysis. Her new assignment officially began on a Monday morning in April. Sarah reported to her new office in a building that didn't appear on any public maps of the Pentagon complex. Her colleagues welcomed her warmly, and she found herself working alongside some of the most dedicated and patriotic individuals she had ever met. The irony wasn't lost on her that one of these people, someone who had sworn the same oath she had taken, someone who had dedicated their life to protecting America, was betraying everything they claimed to believe. The first few weeks passed without incident. Sarah settled into her routine, learning the intricate details of nuclear security protocols, while carefully observing the behavior of everyone around her. She attended meetings where decisions were made that could affect the balance of power between nations. She participated in discussions about weapons systems that represented the ultimate expression of human destructive capability. Throughout this period, she maintained her cover perfectly. Her colleagues saw her as a dedicated young officer who was honored to serve in such a critical role. They had no idea that she was analyzing their every action, looking for signs of the betrayal that someone among them was committing. Sarah found herself caught between admiration for the professionalism of her colleagues and the growing paranoia that came with knowing one of them was lying about everything. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening in late April. Sarah was working late, reviewing authentication logs from the previous week, when she noticed something that didn't fit the established patterns. One of the senior officers had requested access to nuclear protocol information outside of his normal area of responsibility. The request had been approved through proper channels, but something about the timing and the specific nature of the information requested triggered Sarah's suspicions. She spent the next several hours cross-referencing the request with intelligence reports about recent foreign intelligence activities. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. The information that had been accessed corresponded exactly with intelligence gaps that foreign agents had been trying to fill according to intercepted communications. The correlation was too precise to be coincidental. The officer in question was General Marcus Blackwood, a decorated veteran with 30 years of distinguished service and a reputation that seemed beyond reproach. He had served in 3 combat zones, earned the Distinguished Service Cross, and was widely respected throughout the Pentagon as a man of unquestionable integrity. The idea that someone with his background could be involved in espionage seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet the evidence Sarah had uncovered pointed directly to him. Sarah spent sleepless nights wrestling with what she had discovered. She reviewed the evidence countless times, hoping to find an alternative explanation that would clear General Blackwood of suspicion. She examined his service record, his financial situation, his family background, and his personal relationships, searching for anything that might explain why a man who had devoted his life to serving his country would suddenly turn against everything he had sworn to protect. What she found made the situation even more complex. Blackwood's record was spotless, but it also revealed several personal tragedies that might have created vulnerabilities. His son had been killed in Afghanistan 3 years earlier, and his marriage had ended in divorce shortly afterward. Financial records showed that he was struggling to pay for his daughter's medical treatments for a rare genetic condition. The combination of grief, loneliness, and financial pressure could have made him susceptible to recruitment by foreign intelligence services. Sarah knew she needed to gather more evidence before reporting her suspicions to General Morrison. Making accusations against someone of Blackwood's stature without absolute proof would end her career and potentially compromise the entire investigation. She began developing a plan to observe Blackwood more closely, using her position to monitor his activities without arousing his suspicion. The opportunity came when Blackwood requested her assistance with a special project involving the review of nuclear authentication procedures. Sarah volunteered to work directly with him, explaining that she was eager to learn from someone with his experience and expertise. Blackwood seemed pleased by her enthusiasm and agreed to take her under his wing for the duration of the project. Working closely with Blackwood gave Sarah unprecedented access to his daily activities and communications. she discovered that he was indeed accessing classified information beyond his normal responsibilities. But he was doing so under the authority of special orders that appeared legitimate. The orders came from the office of General Harrison Wells, a four-star general who held one of the most powerful positions in the Defense Department and was known for his aggressive approach to national security matters. Sarah's investigation now took a dangerous turn, as she began to suspect that the espionage network might extend beyond a single individual. If General Wells was involved, either as a knowing participant or as an unwitting accomplice, the implications were staggering. Wells had access to some of the most sensitive military secrets in the American arsenal, and his influence extended throughout the highest levels of government. The more Sarah investigated, the more complex the situation became. She discovered that Wells had been pushing for changes in nuclear security protocols that would actually make the systems more vulnerable to penetration by foreign agents. He had also been advocating for the sharing of certain classified information with allied nations, information that could easily find its way into the hands of hostile intelligence services through those same allies. Sarah realized she was walking into a trap that had been carefully constructed over many months, possibly years. Someone had been systematically compromising nuclear security from within the highest levels of command, using legitimate channels and proper procedures to mask their treacherous activities. The sophistication of the operation suggested involvement by a professional intelligence service with extensive knowledge of American military procedures. The moment of truth came on a Friday evening when Sarah was working late in her office. General Wells appeared unexpectedly, claiming he needed to review some documents related to Blackwood's special project. Sarah's instincts immediately went on high alert as she noticed that Wells seemed more interested in observing her work than in examining any documents. She began to suspect that her investigation had been discovered and that Wells was there to determine how much she knew. Wells began asking seemingly casual questions about her background, her family, her financial situation, and her career ambitions. Sarah recognized the questions as a standard recruitment approach used by intelligence operatives to identify potential assets or to assess security threats. She answered carefully, trying to appear cooperative while avoiding revealing anything that might compromise her mission or endanger her safety. The conversation took an ominous turn when Wells mentioned that he had been reviewing her security clearance file and had noticed some discrepancies in her assignment paperwork. He suggested that there might be administrative errors that could affect her career prospects if they weren't corrected promptly. Sarah understood the implicit threat and realized that Wells was offering her a choice between cooperation and professional destruction. Wells then made his proposal explicit. He explained that certain allies of the United States were facing security threats that could be addressed if they had access to specific technical information about American nuclear systems. He described this as a matter of international cooperation that would ultimately strengthen American security by helping allies defend themselves against common enemies. The proposal was presented as a patriotic duty that would require discretion but would be fully authorized at the highest levels of government. Sarah recognized the proposal as a classic espionage recruitment pitch, designed to make treason sound like patriotism. She also realized that she was in immediate danger. Wells had revealed himself as either the traitor she had been seeking or as someone working closely with that traitor. Either way, her continued investigation posed a direct threat to his operations, and she could no longer assume that her safety was guaranteed. She needed to find a way to extract herself from the situation without arousing Wells' suspicions, while also gathering evidence that could be used to expose the conspiracy. Sarah told Wells that she was honored by his confidence in her, and that she would need some time to consider his proposal carefully. She asked for specific details about what would be required of her, hoping to gather information that could later be used as evidence of his treasonous activities. Wells seemed satisfied with her response, and provided her with contact information for what he described as a liaison officer who would coordinate her involvement in the special program. He also gave her a secure communication device and explained procedures for transmitting information without detection by routine security monitoring. The sophistication of the equipment and procedures confirmed Sarah's suspicion that this was a professional intelligence operation with significant resources and planning behind it. After Wells left her office, Sarah sat alone in the darkness, understanding that she had reached a point of no return in her investigation. She now had direct evidence of espionage activities involving at least one four-star general. But she also knew that making this information public would put her own life at risk. The people she was investigating had the power to destroy her career, her reputation, and potentially her life if they perceived her as a threat to their operations. Sarah spent the weekend developing a plan that would allow her to safely report her discoveries to General Morrison while protecting herself from retaliation. She realized that she would need to act quickly, as Wells would expect a response to his recruitment attempt within a reasonable time frame. Delaying too long would raise suspicions. But moving too quickly might prevent her from gathering additional evidence that could help identify other members of the conspiracy. Monday morning arrived with the weight of destiny pressing down on Sarah's shoulders. She had spent the weekend crafting her strategy, knowing that the next few hours would determine not only her own fate, but potentially the security of the entire nation. She arrived at work early, using the quiet morning hours to review nuclear authentication codes and prepare for what she knew would be the most dangerous day of her life. At precisely 0800 hours, Sarah received a message instructing her to report to General Wells's office for what was described as a routine briefing. She understood that this was likely the moment when Wells would expect her answer to his recruitment proposal. Sarah had prepared a response that would buy her additional time while allowing her to gather more evidence. But she knew that walking into Wells's office could be walking into a trap from which there might be no escape. The Pentagon corridors seemed longer than usual as Sarah made her way to Wells's office, located in a section of the building reserved for the highest-ranking officials. The security checkpoints were more stringent here, and Sarah noticed that several of the guards were unfamiliar faces who seemed to be paying particular attention to her movements. She began to suspect that Wells had arranged additional security measures, possibly in preparation for eliminating a perceived threat to his operations. When Sarah entered Wells's office, she found him waiting with two other individuals she didn't recognize. One was a woman in civilian clothes, who introduced herself as a State Department liaison, while the other was a man in military uniform who claimed to represent international cooperation initiatives. Sarah immediately understood that this meeting was designed to provide legitimacy to whatever treasonous activities Wells was orchestrating. Wells began the meeting by explaining that Sarah had been selected for a special assignment that would require the highest levels of discretion and patriotism. He described a program designed to share certain technical information with allied nations facing imminent security threats from hostile forces. The presentation was polished and convincing, designed to make espionage sound like legitimate international cooperation sanctioned by the highest levels of American government. Sarah listened carefully as Wells outlined what would be required of her. She would need to provide regular reports on nuclear authentication procedures, share technical specifications for security systems, and facilitate access to classified databases by foreign liaison officers. The scope of the information sharing was breathtaking in its comprehensive nature, essentially providing foreign intelligence services with a complete blueprint of American nuclear security procedures. The moment came when Wells asked for her formal commitment to the program. Sarah took a deep breath and began her response, knowing that her words would determine whether she lived or died in the next few minutes. She expressed her honor at being selected and her commitment to serving her country in whatever capacity was required. Then she mentioned that she had some concerns about proper authorization procedures and asked to see documentation confirming that the program had been approved by appropriate authorities. Wells's demeanor immediately changed as he realized that Sarah was not going to be the compliant asset he had hoped to recruit. His friendly facade dropped away, replaced by the cold calculation of a professional intelligence operative who had been discovered. The woman claiming to represent the State Department moved toward the office door, while the man in uniform positioned himself between Sarah and the exit. Sarah recognized that the situation had become immediately life-threatening and that she needed to take decisive action to survive. She remembered her emergency protocols and the code words that would alert General Morrison to her situation, but she also knew that she was surrounded by people who had the power and resources to ensure that any message she sent would never reach its intended recipient. In a moment of inspiration born from desperation, Sarah began reciting what appeared to be a random series of numbers and letters. Wells initially dismissed this as nervous behavior under pressure. But as Sarah continued, his expression changed to one of growing alarm. The numbers she was reciting were nuclear authentication codes, the most closely guarded secrets in the American military arsenal. Sarah explained calmly that she had memorized the complete authentication sequence for the current rotation period, including backup codes and emergency override procedures. She pointed out that if anything happened to her, the codes would need to be changed immediately, triggering a massive security investigation that would inevitably expose Wells's activities. Furthermore, she had established procedures to automatically transmit the codes to media outlets if she failed to check in at regular intervals. The brilliant audacity of Sarah's gambit lay in its simplicity. By threatening to compromise the very nuclear secrets that Wells was trying to steal, she had created a situation where harming her would actually damage his espionage operations more than allowing her to live. Wells understood that killing Sarah would trigger security procedures that would make it impossible for him to continue accessing classified information. Wells found himself caught in a trap of his own making. His entire operation depended on maintaining his legitimate access to classified information while secretly sharing it with foreign intelligence services. If Sarah's death prompted a security investigation, that access would be immediately revoked, destroying months or years of careful planning and positioning. Sarah pressed her advantage by explaining that she had already documented evidence of Wells's activities and had arranged for that evidence to be transmitted to appropriate authorities if anything happened to her. She described the evidence in enough detail to convince Wells that she had indeed uncovered his entire operation, including his connections to foreign intelligence services and the network of accomplices who had assisted him. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, as Wells calculated his options, and Sarah maintained her steady recitation of nuclear codes. The other two people in the room looked to Wells for guidance, clearly unprepared for this unexpected development. Sarah could see Wells weighing the risks of immediate violence against the longer-term consequences of exposure. Finally, Wells made his decision. He ordered his companions to leave the room, and then sat down across from Sarah to negotiate the terms of their mutual survival. He acknowledged that she had outmaneuvered him and expressed grudging respect for her tactical intelligence. However, he also made it clear that their conflict was far from over, and that she had made herself a permanent enemy of very dangerous people. Sarah agreed to a temporary truce that would allow both of them to extract themselves from the immediate situation. Wells would abandon his current espionage activities and arrange for his transfer to a position where he would no longer have access to nuclear secrets. In return, Sarah would delay reporting her evidence for 48 hours, giving Wells time to disappear before the investigation began. The agreement was a calculated risk for both parties, but it represented the best outcome either could hope for given the circumstances. Wells understood that his espionage career was over, and that he would need to vanish completely to avoid prosecution. Sarah knew that she had prevented the immediate compromise of nuclear secrets, but that Wells' network of accomplices would continue to pose a threat until they could be identified and neutralized. As Sarah left Wells's office, she understood that her life had been permanently changed by the events of the past hour. She had faced down one of the most powerful military officials in the country and had survived through a combination of preparation, intelligence, and sheer audacity. The nuclear codes she had memorized had become her salvation, transforming her from a vulnerable target into someone too dangerous to eliminate. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with General Morrison and federal investigators to unravel the full extent of Wells's espionage network. The investigation revealed connections to foreign intelligence services, financial corruption, and security breaches that had been ongoing for several years. Wells himself was never captured, having successfully disappeared with the assistance of his foreign handlers. But his network was dismantled, and American nuclear security was restored. Sarah's actions earned her commendations from the highest levels of government, though the classified nature of her mission meant that her heroism would never be publicly recognized. She continued her military career with the knowledge that she had played a crucial role in protecting her country from one of the most serious security threats it had ever faced. The nuclear codes that had once seemed like abstract sequences of numbers had become the weapon she used to defend the principles she had sworn to protect.